emotional about the hounding of the press and the paparazzi and how they were making her life miserable. So I think I did my job.
For more than 20 years, one face greeted America before its coffee even finished brewing. He sat behind the Today Show desk, joked with Katie Couric, interviewed sitting presidents, and made 40 million households feel like the day was starting off just fine. Then, in a single morning in November 2017, all of that vanished. A network memo, a tearful announcement from his own co-anchor, and a name that had once meant trust suddenly meant something else entirely. This is the story of how Matt Lauer built one of the most powerful careers in American television and how it collapsed almost overnight. Matthew Todd Lauer was born on December 30th, 1957, in New York City. His father worked as an executive at a bicycle company and came from an immigrant Jewish family that valued discipline and hard work above almost everything else. His mother had spent time modeling and later ran her own boutique, and she brought a very different energy into the household, one built around style, presentation, and knowing how to hold a room. Growing up between those two influences shaped him in ways that would matter enormously once cameras entered the picture. He learned early how to read a room, how to look composed under pressure, and how to make people feel comfortable around him. Skills that don't show up on a resume, but end up defining an entire broadcasting career. He enrolled at Ohio University in the late 1970s to study communications, but in 1979, at just 21 years old, he dropped out only a handful of credits shy of graduating. He wasn't interested in finishing on paper. He wanted to be on air. His first job was about as far from network television as it gets, a news producer position at a station in Huntington, West Virginia. But within a year, he was reporting on camera, and it became clear fairly quickly that he had a knack for this. Calm, likable, quick on his feet. Between 1980 and 1986, he bounced between markets, co-hosting a lifestyle program in 3 different cities, Richmond, Providence, and eventually New York, refining his delivery with every stop. By 1986, he'd landed a national gig, co-hosting an ABC celebrity lifestyle program alongside Robin Leach. It didn't last long, but it put his face in front of a nationwide audience for the first time. Over the following years, he worked an almost absurd schedule, local anchoring jobs in Philadelphia and Boston, while also picking up assignments for ESPN and HBO. People who worked with him during that stretch remember someone who was constantly moving, constantly working, and building a reputation as a broadcaster who could adapt to nearly any format. There was a rockier chapter, too. Between 1989 and 1991, he anchored a live New York talk program that, under pressure to chase ratings, began drifting toward the sensational tabloid-style television that was becoming popular at the time. Lauer wasn't comfortable with where it was heading, clashed with producers, and eventually walked away. By 1992, he was, by his own later admission, nearly broke. That's when WNBC threw him a lifeline, hiring him to co-anchor a local morning broadcast. Within a year, he'd been promoted again. He built a reputation inside NBC as someone who would show up, do the work, and never complain about the hours, filling in wherever the network needed him, from weekend broadcasts to national news coverage. That reliability eventually caught the attention of people much higher up the chain. In January 1994, Lauer was named the full-time news anchor of NBC's Today Show. 5 months later, in June, he officially stepped into the role that would define the next 2 decades of his life. The show wasn't in great shape at the time. Good Morning America had been eating into its audience for years, and NBC needed someone who could change that trajectory. He turned out to be exactly what the show needed. His warmth on camera, paired with a genuine chemistry with Katie Couric, helped pull viewers back. Their on-air dynamic, playful, teasing, quick with each other, became one of the signature elements of the show's revival. He also proved he could handle serious moments, not just the lighter morning show material. He was part of the network's coverage during the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 and helped guide viewers through the emotional weight of the O.J. Simpson trial coverage. It's one thing to be charming during a cooking segment. It's another to hold a room together when the news is genuinely terrible. Lauer could do both, and that versatility mattered enormously to NBC. In January 1997, he officially took over as co-anchor from Brian Gumbel, and the ratings that followed were among the strongest in the show's history to that point. For the next 20 years, Lauer effectively was the Today Show. He interviewed presidents, celebrities, athletes, and ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. In 1997, he also became a contributing anchor for Dateline NBC, giving him a foothold in longer-form investigative journalism, a rare crossover for a morning show host, and one he maintained for 2 decades alongside his Today Show duties. Somewhere in the middle of all that, he also went back and finished what he'd started decades earlier. In 1997, Ohio University invited him back, not just to complete his degree, but to deliver the commencement address. Instead of sitting through traditional coursework, he wrote a paper connecting his broadcasting career to what he'd originally studied, and that summer he walked at graduation nearly 20 years after his classmates had. He later said the moment meant more to him personally than almost anything else in his career. In July 1997, Lauer met Dutch model Annette Roque on a blind date. The relationship moved quickly. They married a little over a year later, in October 1998, in Bridgehampton, New York. Roque had built a modeling career in Paris and New York and brought her own public profile into the marriage, which only intensified media interest in the couple. They went on to have 3 children together, sons Jack and Tejas, and a daughter Romy, and for years presented a picture of a stable family life, appearing together at school events and equestrian competitions. But the pressure of Lauer's fame and schedule reportedly wore on the relationship. In 2006, Roque filed for divorce, citing serious allegations about his behavior at home. The filing shocked people who had only ever seen the two of them in public as a warm, easygoing couple. A few weeks later, she withdrew the petition, and the two chose to stay together and try counseling rather than separate. For more than a decade afterward, they remained publicly married, continuing to appear together at events even as friends later described their private life as far more distant than it looked from the outside. The marriage would not survive what came next. On the night of November 27, 2017, NBC received a detailed complaint from a female colleague describing what she called inappropriate sexual behavior by Lauer, tracing back to the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. NBC News chairman Andrew Lack reviewed the complaint and within roughly 48 hours made the decision to terminate Lauer's employment, a stunning turnaround for someone who had anchored the network's flagship morning program for over 20 years. On the morning of November 29th, Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb learned the news only minutes before they had to deliver it live to millions of viewers. Both were visibly shaken as they read the network's statement on air. Lack's memo to staff described the complaint as representing, in his words, a clear violation of the company's standards, and noted that while it was the first formal complaint against Lauer in over 20 years at the network, NBC had reason to believe it might not have been an isolated incident. That last line turned out to be prophetic. Within 24 hours, additional women came forward with their own accounts describing a pattern of misconduct stretching back years. The New York Times reported that one former employee described an incident from 2001 in which she said Lauer sexually assaulted her in his office. Variety, which had already been investigating Lauer's workplace conduct for months, published a wide-ranging report the same day citing multiple current and former NBC employees who described a pattern of inappropriate behavior, including allegations that he exposed himself to a colleague and gave inappropriate personal gifts to female staff. NBC declined to pay out the remainder of Lauer's contract, terminating him for cause. He had reportedly been earning somewhere in the range of $20 million a year at the time. The financial and reputational cost was immediate and total. Lauer responded the following day with a public statement acknowledging that some of what was being said about him was true and that he was ashamed, while also disputing other elements of what had been reported as untrue or mischaracterized. He did not go into detail about which allegations he was disputing. An internal investigation NBC commissioned in the following months found no evidence that network or Today's Show leadership had received complaints about Lauer's conduct before November 27, 2017, a finding that pushed back against claims from some employees that management had known and looked the other way for years. The network used the findings to introduce new internal policies, making it a fireable offense to conceal knowledge of workplace misconduct. The story did not end with Lauer's firing. In October 2019, journalist Ronan Farrow published Catch and Kill, a book examining how powerful media institutions had suppressed sexual misconduct allegations for years. The book detailed an account from Brooke Nevels, a former NBC producer who had worked with Lauer during the Sochi Olympics, describing an encounter in his hotel room that she characterized as an assault. Farrow's reporting placed Lauer's case within a much larger pattern the book examined, instances where networks, including NBC itself, had allegedly worked to keep serious allegations against powerful figures out of public view. Lauer strongly disputed Nevels' account, maintaining publicly that the encounter had been consensual and calling the characterization of it as an assault false. NBC, for its part, stood by its original 2017 statement describing Lauer's conduct as appalling and reprehensible. In 2020, after roughly 2 years of public silence, Lauer published a lengthy open letter addressing the allegations directly. He denied the most serious claims, argued that the reporting around his case had been unfair and incomplete, and acknowledged that he had made real mistakes in his personal conduct while pushing back against how the media had portrayed him. The letter did little to change public opinion, and Nevels has continued to stand by her account in the years since, including in a memoir of her own published more recently, in which she again described the encounter and its aftermath in detail. Lauer's public life essentially ended overnight. Longtime friends and colleagues distanced themselves, and by most accounts, he spent much of 2018 largely out of public view, retreating to his property in the Hamptons. He had purchased a large waterfront estate there in 2016, and for a period afterward it became something close to a refuge from the world that had turned on him so quickly. His marriage to Annette Roque, already strained for years, did not survive the scandal. She filed for divorce again shortly after his firing, and it was finalized in 2019 after nearly 2 decades of marriage. By most accounts, the settlement was generous toward Roque, and the two have continued to co-parent their 3 children with what people close to the family describe as a relatively cooperative arrangement. Later in 2019, Lauer began a relationship with Shaman Abbas, a British-born publicist and marketing executive he had known for years through industry circles. The two have kept their relationship largely out of the spotlight, occasionally appearing together at low-key events in Hamptons, but otherwise avoiding the kind of public visibility that once defined Lauer's entire career. He has not returned to television. Reports have surfaced periodically over the years, suggesting he's explored the idea of some kind of comeback, but nothing has materialized, and industry observers have been consistently skeptical that any network would take on the reputational risk. His net worth, built over decades at the peak of network television salaries, has reportedly remained substantial even after the divorce settlement and the loss of his NBC income, enough that he's had no real financial need to return to work, whether or not the opportunity ever presents itself. What's clear, looking at where things stand now, is that Matt Lauer's story didn't end with a redemption arc. It ended with a very deliberate retreat, out of the public eye, out of the industry that made him famous, and into a much smaller, quieter version of the life he once had. Whether that ever changes remains an open question. For now, the man who used to wake up millions of Americans every morning has settled into being, by nearly every account, almost impossible to find.